we have a first caller here. This is an interesting call. I don't know if anybody's asked me about this on the air, and I guess I'd be curious to see your thoughts on this, Emma, although I don't know how informed either of us would be. But we have David, who's calling in from Georgia. David, you are live on Talk Heathen. What's up?
Hey, what's up? Yeah, I just wanted an atheist perspective on the Israeli Palestinian conflict, being as it's kind of a religious issue and topic. I think others will argue it's a humanitarian issue, but I would disagree with that. But bringing it all in, I just want y'all's perspectives.
Yeah, so I'll talk about this first because, like, there is a religious element to it, but it's not the entire reason, right? So the religious element to, well, let's talk about the secular reasons that come into this first, right? So if we're talking about, first of all, the Palestinian people have been in that land since before Israel was created as a nation. A part of the United States, a support of Israel as a nation in terms of foreign policy is kind of twofold. One, because having an ally in the Middle East is really good for us to be able to do stuff in the Middle East. That's the one sort of pragmatic reason. But then there's another reason, and the other reason is a little more crazy, but true, is that evangelicals in this country literally think that in order for the second coming to happen, in order for the events of the rapture to take place, at least if you take a particular stance, there's post-millennials versus other kinds of Christians who view the rapture differently. It gets really complicated, but the point is, Israel as a nation kind of has to exist in order to fulfill prophecies, specifically end of the world prophecies, which is why evangelical Christians, who make up a large portion of people in the United States, are vehemently like pro-Israel. Like they love Israel, not because they have any particular love for the Jewish people or culture or Israel as a nation, but purely because there is a fulfillment of this end of the world prophecy, which is just a wild thing. But that's just kind of the truth of it. That's why a lot of people are pro-Israel. Again, one is very pragmatic reasons. The other is just kind of off the wall reasons. So yeah, like the Palestinian people were there. I think Israel's great. Personally, I think it's great in an apartheid state for people who are displaced from their homes, and I think it's fucked up. So I don't think we should support that for religious reasons or otherwise, because I think it is a human rights problem. But that's my take on it. Emma, what do you think?
Yeah, I share your perspective. I think there's a religious element, which I understand, but I think you have to have a certain appreciation for biblical literalism to be able to empathize with that position, and I don't. So no.
Yeah, I would say there's folks like, and not to speak ill of the dead, but folks like Christopher Hitchens, folks like atheists who had a perspective in like the early 2000s in particular, who are like, oh, every single issue in the Middle East is because of religious problems. And it's like, yeah, that definitely plays a role, but like it's a lot more complicated than that. And any atheist that is going to like kind of melt it down to just that single thing, I think is really missing a bigger, more complicated picture. So I wouldn't be very that simplistic about it, if that makes sense, David. But what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely like that viewpoint more, and because I've heard the same thing from other atheists that it's all about religion and blah blah. Although I do think religion is the main root of the issue, I can agree with that. There are undoubtedly some political issues involved as well, but the main thing is I'm a supporter of pilgrimages because that's where we started from in America, at least. And although it may be seen as oppressive, the Jewish people have been oppressed their whole existence. And although those are the indigenous people, and I do understand that they say that the land was promised and everything, but the Jewish people have been scattered all over Europe, the Spanish Inquisition, of course, the Holocaust, and just several things. I think that colonialism can be a benefit. We've seen in Africa, and it's not always a bad thing. And I feel like the Arabs and Palestinians are kind of treating it like that, and they've never been able to govern themselves. Right. Yeah.
Wow.
They've never been able to govern themselves.
The Palestinians have never been able to govern themselves. Interesting.
Not right. I mean, it's a new nation, just like Israel is. Like Palestine, the Palestinians kind of came together as kind of like an ethnic nation, kind of like the same thing that Israel did.
Have you ever considered the possibility that the Palestinians maybe were governing themselves until the establishment of Israel, and maybe perhaps part of the reason why they can't govern themselves is that they literally can't live on the lands by which they were taken from? You know, when people talk about
they can
this,
still live there.
David, when people talk about this, you know, Native American people were governing themselves quite well before we showed up.
They didn't get past the Stone Age. They did not progress past the Stone Age. They had every chance in the world to, but they didn't progress.
I don't know what
that's just factually inaccurate.
For a different topic.
Well, no, because I think what you just said was that colonialism is a good thing, and nations on Earth, including nations in Africa, which are currently suffering from the most awful things as a result of their
colonialism left. They're suffering because colonialism left.
Oh, okay. So your
look at India.
It's the colony powers that were keeping these nations in check, and now that the colonies have left, now that they've gone to shit because they don't have their masters ruling them anymore, right? Because they can't govern themselves.
Correct. Yes.
Right. So this is bad. This is a bad take, David. It's a bad take for a lot of reasons. I don't know if you know this, but every nation on Earth has had trouble governing themselves. If we took this position, right, and said, "Oh, people can't govern ourselves," Canada would have invaded the United States back in like 2016. Well, my point is, right, you can use this to justify a lot of bad things, right? I believe that people should be able to have self-governance, whether that's through an ethno-state or not, whatever. The point is, this idea is that these people...
so you believe in an ethno-state? What about a white ethno-state? Would you believe in that?
David, listen, whether that's through an ethno-state or not, right, whether it's through a nations of people that already lived there before other people lived there, I'm saying people have a right to govern themselves. You don't need colonial states to interfere with that, right? And what's happening with Israel right now is exactly that. They have created a new apartheid. The Israeli people have created new zones where Palestinians can live, and they are deciding what to do with lands that Palestinians have been living on for centuries. Okay. And this is a bad thing. Okay. I'm not saying the creation of Israel in itself and its original idea of it isn't bad, but what's happening today is bad. What's going on today is not something that I don't think anybody should be able to support. And it's we've already seen this in history. We've seen this all over the world, what's been happening in Israel right now. And it's not great. I'm talking a lot here, Emma. I want you to chime in too. But
no, it's all right. I just thought it was fascinating, David, that you kind of threw out that Native Americans are different, because that's the exact position I've heard this argument made in, that thanks to colonialism, I don't want to make the argument because I don't believe it.
Thanks to colonialism, Indians have got the casinos. I mean, that's thanks to colonialism. They own the casinos. They run it like a racket. Thanks to colonialism. That's thanks to colonialism. So they should be thanking us, because, like I said, we came over
for the
Stone Age.
David, did you know that
natural resources?
David, did you know that Native Americans have one of the highest rates of suicide and poverty in the country? Did you know that?
No, what is that?
Did you know that Native Americans historically have had one of the lowest rates of socioeconomic success out of any other race in this country? Did you know that, David? Did you know that?
It's due to their own problems, because they sit in their reservations and they drink alcohol when their body can't process it.
What the fuck should they thank you for? What the fuck should they thank us for? They shouldn't thank us for goddamn shit. Do you understand me? Let me tell you something. You are ignorant. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. I have been on Native American reservations. I have worked with these people. Granted, I did it when I was a Christian, believe it or not. I've worked on these lands and I've seen the atrocities committed by people like you and opinions like you, and you are fucking ignorant. You have no goddamn idea what the fuck you're talking about. Okay? Most people, guess what? If you're living on a reservation, you don't own a fucking casino. Do you understand? Okay? Just because they exist out there doesn't mean that everybody in the community benefits from that. You have never had been told this is your land and we're sticking you here because your ancestors were fucking murdered. Okay? Because this is what the government says is your property and your place. You don't know anything, David. I suggest I'm gonna let this call go because you're not gonna hear anything what I'm saying right now. But I suggest you reflect and really think about what you're saying and actually go fucking talk to people who have to deal with the living conditions that you are describing as so glorious and something that we should be thankful for. Fucking disgraceful. Get the fuck out of here. That pissed me off. I can't even deal with that shit.
That was
Sorry, Emma.
beautifully handled, Dan. That was really beautifully handled.
Well, I'm just saying, look, it's one thing to have a bad take. It's another thing to say ignorant racist bullshit and to think that you can't be questioned by it. Okay.
Amazing.
I have limits. That's a limit for me.
That was a spicy start. While we're on the topic of reservations and Native Americans having their land stolen, I read recently in a book about the best way to make positive environmental change that one of the top things to do is return land to their native owners, because
Yep.
the methods of agriculture and living and stuff is just far more environmentally friendly. So there's a nice fact to kind of lift the mood a little bit.
Yes. You know, like this is, you know, is tangential to typical issues that we talk about because we primarily talk about issues related to religion, but religion plays a part as to why uh the Native American situation exists as it does today. Okay. The elements that we see in colonialism are also religiously motivated. This
Mm.
idea that other people need to be governed by a quote unquote civilized nation. Part of what we define as civilized is the religion. Okay. Christianity is supposed to be the civilizing and civilizer nation state, right? It's supposed to be the one that says, we know how you should be acting, and you're not acting this way because you're not right with God and you're not following our social customs. And if you just do what we tell you to do and how we tell you to do it, then you're going to succeed. And if you don't, well, this is why you fail. This has not been historically true for the success of nations. There's all kinds of nations that aren't Christian that have absolutely flourished. One, in part because they are self-governed, but also because they've existed in other empire nation states, right? Like other empires with their own religions and their own doctrines. So I'm not going to, you know, you can't just say one is better than the other because you've had some historical success. Why don't you tell that to the Babylonians? Why don't you tell that to the Mesopotamians? Why don't you tell it to any other conquering empire? It just so happens that Christianity has been a recent conqueror, but it won't be the last, probably. But anyway.